Last week, we said HR is not your friend. This week, I want you to consider when HR is your friend. I'm Dr. Jonathan. I work with organizations to make them inclusive, and I'm on a mission to help a million people like you to make your workplace inclusive. Get your pen and paper ready because we're discussing when employees can trust human resources. This is the second part in a two-part series about your relationship with HR. Last week, we discussed why employees should never trust human resources. This was the title of an article that I came across. We discussed some key themes of that article and more importantly, what it meant for you at work. Last week was not a balanced conversation. It was not supposed to be. This week is not a balanced conversation either. But we're flipping it the other way. Last week, I said that HR is an agent of the organization. HR is the true face of an organization. And HR doesn't have the power that you think it does. Okay, but what if HR or the people function was all about the people? We think of inclusion as a systematic business strategy to ensure that everyone shares the same advantages and benefits. Everyone can perform, everyone can belong, everyone can reach their potential. What if human resources was all about that too? Now I know some of you are thinking that's just not true. Some of you are thinking, but Dr. Jonathan, we know you can be naive. The other day you told us that you dream about Star Trek and diversity and inclusion. This is true. And as harsh and pragmatic as I can be, you need to be a bit naive to do this work without being worn out by it. But that's not the point here. Here, we like evidence-based inclusion. It's a great way to think things through. We think of it as a thorough system for making better decisions that considers the scientific literature, data from your organization, the stakeholders affected by your decisions, and professional expertise. So when I talk about HR, it's nice to have some evidence. Last week, I discussed some research that I did, so this week I'm going to do the same. I've talked about this before, but since 2021, I've studied over 200 HR leaders. My first study was in 2021 with a smaller sample. It was service-based organizations with less than 1,000 employees, and they were all UK based. And you know what? I kept on finding the same thing. And I want to use this to answer the question when employees can trust human resources. Now, like I said last week, some of you aren't going to like what we discussed today. That's okay. Make sure you check out last week's show as well so you can make your own mind up. Some of you don't want a balanced conversation. Some of you are against HR. Some of you are for HR. And I'm hoping that this series will help you understand views that you don't agree with. In any event, as always, I want you to make your own mind up. Specifically, I want you to ask yourself if the things that we discuss here are true where you work. So let's talk about the traits of HR leaders. My study of HR leaders found some interesting things. The most successful ones have a few things in common, and here are 9 of them. 1, they believe in people. 2, they constantly seek insights. 3, they are self-motivated learners. 4, they genuinely care about people. 5, they have a clear personal purpose. 6, they read a lot of psychology books. 7, they consider their job a call to action. And 8, they spend most of their time speaking to people. And I really like number 9. They seek to influence the values of the organization. Let me say that again. They seek to influence the values of the organization. This is really important because one of the shortcomings of HR that gets discussed a lot is that HR exists to protect the organization and not the employee. Earlier, I talked about successful HR leaders, but what does that mean? In my study, successful HR leaders were the ones who, by their own standards, were able to protect the employees. They were acting in line with our view of inclusion. Everyone can perform, everyone can belong, everyone can reach their potential. And they weren't naive. They were actually a lot more self-conscious than you think. They were constantly aware of the reputation of HR. They knew that people didn't like them. They cared about how their department was perceived by the rest of the business. Now, not just senior leaders, they wanted people like you to appreciate their team for the work they did. And here's what one leader said in my study. And this is a quote. "I would love to come out of all this and people say, actually, I think they're doing a really good job." In my study, HR just wanted to be recognized for helping people. And what I find is when people like this have the power to influence the values of an organization, that's when employees can trust human resources. In my study, I also spoke to a lot of people who are personally invested in the business. For these HR leaders, it wasn't just a job. I said it earlier, they consider their job to be a call to action. Now, I could see the looks on these people's faces. Some of them, they had real mixed emotions, anger, shame. Some of them had a fear of being consumed by the work because they really took it to heart. Here's what one leader said, and this is a quote. "I've put my heart into this business. I feel very emotionally attached to the business. Blood, sweat, and tears, the lot." I don't know about you, but in my experience, in my 9 to 5, when I was working as an accountant, I never heard anyone speak like that. For me, when HR leaders are on a mission, when they feel like their work is a calling, that's when employees can trust human resources. If you checked out last week's podcast, if you listen to the narratives, the negative narratives around HR, you're going to realize that they often get demonized. Sometimes it's justified, but HR leaders are in the people business, but often they aren't always considered to be people themselves. Too often, they're reduced to processes and procedures. Now, for a lot of people, their contact with HR is limited to admin or the receiving end of problems. Last week's show was all about that. Now, here's the funny thing. The leaders I spoke to, they said they wanted to be more human. At the time I spoke to them, a lot of them were investing in software. But you know why? Their real motivation was to automate processes so they could spend more time with other human beings. People like you. Now, they wanted to spend more time creating room for people to thrive. And here's what one leader said, and this is a quote. "We need to be human about this. We need to humanize it." They kept on going on about this. They were all obsessed with creating a great place to work. And they kept using that phrase over and over again, a great place to work. They really believed it. Honestly, they completely believed what they were saying. For me, when HR are focused on being more human, that's when employees can trust human resources. I find that HR reflects the character of an organization. This is what I've learned from hundreds of interviews. This reflects my own personal experience. HR deliver the will of the leaders. You can trust HR when they have your best interests at heart and are able to influence leaders, influence the organization. I don't want to act like this happens all the time because I don't think it does. Only you can answer if this happens in your organization. But if you do, if it does, you are so lucky. And the people in your organization are probably making good progress on your inclusion journey. So let's wrap this up. What are the key messages here? Employees can trust human resources when 1. HR have the power to influence the values of the organization. 2. HR leaders feel like the work is a calling. And 3. HR are focused on being more human. So what do you think? When do you think people can trust HR? Get in touch or leave a message. I would love to hear from you. If you've learned something from today's show, then give us a 5-star review and a comment wherever you're listening to the podcast. It helps other people like you to find the show. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode.